By the second week of November, in the winter of 1886, Marta Specht had $11, a half-blind dog named Props, and a cabin the whole of Dorsey County had already decided was worthless. She was 44 years old that autumn, gray coming in early at her temples and pulled back hard into a knot she pinned under a wool cap. Her hands were a farmer's hands, thick-knuckled and chapped, and she wore the same long dark work dress with the worked hem she had married in. A fringed brown shawl over her shoulders against a wind that never once stopped scouring the Nebraska plain. When her neighbors saw her out in the field that fall, cutting corn stalks and standing them in shocks and hauling them one bundle at a time to bank against the walls of her little sod and plank house, they laughed. They said the grieving widow had built her old dog a nest and gone soft in the head. What none of them saw, what her husband had paced out and taught her the last autumn he was alive, was why she really banked those shocks chest high around every wall but the door. And what he had buried beneath them along the north wall under a plank lid she did not yet know was there, would make the whole of Dorsey County remember a quiet man they had never troubled to know. Before we go on, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. Heinrich Specht had died in March of the lung fever, coughing into a rag until the coughing stopped, and the silence after was the loudest thing Marta had ever heard. They had come out from Ohio 9 years before with a wagon and a mortgage and a plan, and the plan had been the two of them against the wind. Now it was one of them. The good quarter section, the bottomland with the creek, was mortgaged to the bank in Norfolk, and half again beyond what it would ever fetch. The stock was sold to bury him. What was left unmortgaged, the one thing no lender had wanted and no buyer would touch, was the squat little house itself, dug half into a rise and roofed with sod and plank, sitting alone out on the bare prairie where the wind came at it from three sides with nothing to break it. She had no one out there. Her sister was back in Ohio and had written twice, both times to say come home, both times folded into an envelope Marta could not afford to answer. The nearest woman, Alma Pruett, was 2 miles off and had her own 8 mouths. Heinrich's brother, Otto, lived in town and ran the feed store and had never once liked the flat claim or the woman his brother married. Marta had a stove, a bed, a dog, and $11 in a coffee tin. When the wind rose at night, she lay awake and listened to it work at the walls, and she understood, in a plain way that frightened her, that the wind was patient and she was not going to outlast it on $11. Otto came out the 3rd week of October in his good coat. He stood in her doorway with his hat in his hands and told her she could not winter alone on the flat, that it was foolishness, that a woman had no business trying. He had a man in town, he said, who would take the claim off her hands and give her enough to go back east on. It came out as kindness. It was arithmetic underneath. Marta knew the difference, and she knew, too, that the claim and the little house were the only ground on earth still hers, bought with 9 years and a husband, and no man in a good coat was going to price her off it. It's foolishness, Marta, he told her from the doorstep. A woman can't winter alone on the open flat. My man in town will do right by you. She heard him out to the end. I thank you for the trouble of coming, she said, but this ground is mine, and I'll be keeping it. She did not take his hand. When he drove off, she stood a long while in the doorway with Props leaning warm against her leg, and then she went out to the field with a sickle, because it was the last dry week before the freeze, and there was something Heinrich had made her promise to do. The corn had come in thin that year, but the stalks were good and dry. All through the last mild autumn of his life, Heinrich had walked her out into the field of an evening, and he had shown her a thing his own father had done in the old country when the winters came hard off the mountains. You cut the stalks, he told her, and you stand them in shocks to cure, and then you bank them thick around the house, chest high, tight as you can pack them, clear around, and you leave only the door and the chimney free. He had pasted out with his boot heel in the dirt how deep the ring should run, how high. He made her build a stretch of it once with him, so her hands would learn it. She had thought it a strange thing to teach a body in the good weather, with the sun on them and the fever not yet come. It's a queer chore for September, she had said, and he had only smiled. You'll know the sense of it when you need it, he told her, and not a day before. So she cut, and she stood the shocks, and she let them cure a week under the open sky. Then, bundle by bundle, she carried them in. It was slow, brutal work for one woman and a stiff old dog. The shocks were taller than she was and awkward to grip, and the wind wanted them. And more than once she stood out there with cornstalks in her arms and cried, not from grief exactly, but from the sheer aloneness of the labor, the fact that there was no second pair of hands and never would be again. But she banked them. She built the ring exactly as he had shown her, packing the dry stalks in against the sod and plank until the little house sat inside a thick chest, high wall of them, tawny gold against the graying land, with only the plank door and the stone chimney breathing free. That was when the county decided she had lost her wits. Alma Pruitt came by and looked at it and went quiet and kind, gentle as folks get with someone they have decided is not well. The Hodel boys rode past on their way to town and hollered something and laughed, and one of them called it the widow's hen house, and another called it the dog's nest, and the name stuck. Dog's nest. It went around the church steps and the feed store, and Otto heard it and set his jaw, because a mad sister-in-law was a harder thing to price out than a stubborn one. The Reverend Tilson drove out on a Sunday and sat with her, and talked gently about grief and about how a body sometimes did peculiar things in the first winter of a loss, and asked, ever so carefully, whether she might not be more comfortable in town among people. Marta poured him coffee and let him say his piece and thanked him, and said she was comfortable enough. When he left, she looked at the ring of shocks in the low light, and, for one bad hour, she wondered whether they were right, whether she had banked a wall of dead corn around a house for no better reason than that a dead man had once told her to. Stay with me here, because the next thing that happened is the thing that turned it. And if you're finding some quiet in this story tonight, take a second to subscribe so the next one finds you too. The first hard cold came the last night of November, and it came like a door slamming. Marta woke before dawn to a stillness that was wrong, and she lay listening, and then she understood what was wrong. She could not hear the wind at the walls. She could hear it, high up and far off, tearing along over the roof and out across the flat with a sound like a river. But down at the walls, down where she slept, it was quiet. She rose in the black cold and put her palm flat against the north wall, the wall the wind hit hardest, the wall that all through October had been cold as a gravestone by morning. It was cool. It was not cold. The chill that should have been soaking through the sod and plank and into her bones was not there, and it took her a moment to understand that the wall of shocks outside was doing exactly what he had said it would do. The packed stalks were full of dead, still air, and dead still air does not carry heat away. The wind could not get its fingers to the wall to claw the warmth out. The house sat inside its own held breath. She stood there in the dark with her hand on the cool wall, and she began quietly to laugh, and then to cry, and the two came together as they will in a person past the end of their strength, and Props got up stiff from his corner and pressed against her, and she knelt down and put her arms around the dog's neck and stayed there a long time. Heinrich had not built her a nest. He had built her a wall. He had known he might not last the winter, and he had spent the last good weeks of his strength teaching her hands to save her own life, and he had let the whole county laugh at her rather than frighten her with the reason while he was dying. She understood, kneeling on the cold floor with her face in the dog's ruff, that the banking of the shocks had been a message, and she had very nearly not read it. December came down on the plains like a lid. The snow started the 8th and did not properly stop. First it came sideways, then it came in earnest, and then the wind found it and drove it. And by the 3rd day, nobody in Dorsey County was going anywhere. It was the kind of blizzard the old ones talked about for the rest of their lives, the kind that killed school teachers walking children home, that froze cattle standing up against the fences they drifted into, that erased the line between the ground and the sky so a man could lose his own barn 30 feet from his door. 9 days it blew. 9 days the world was white and screaming. And Marta Specht sat inside her held breath and was warm. She was not comfortable, understand. She was rationing coal and burning corn stalks from the inside of the wall when the coal ran thin, and she was melting snow for water and eating careful, and she was frightened, as anyone alone in that storm would be. But her walls held their heat. Her chimney drew clean and steady, and the smoke went up out of the top of that ring of gold-brown shocks and got torn away into the white, and it was the only chimney for a mile in any direction still breathing. She did not know that yet. She knew only that when she woke and put her hand to the north wall, it was still cool and not cold, and that Props slept warm at the foot of the bed, and that the dry cornstalk smell filled the little house, and under it the wood smoke, and under that the old smell of the sod. And it was, against everything, the smell of a place a person could live. By the 4th day she had stopped counting hours and started counting the coal. She kept it in her head as she worked, subtracting each scoop, and the number frightened her. So she began to feed the fire with dry corn stalks pulled from the inner face of the wall, learning as she went how they caught quick and burned hot and short, and how the wall did not miss the few she took. She kept her shawl pinned close and her cap down over her ears even indoors, and she talked to the dog to hear a voice in the room, low and steady, telling him what her hands were doing as she did it, the way a person alone will. There now, she would say, banking a stick. There now, Props, we're all right yet. And they were, for all the world had ended past the door. The wind screamed, and the little house held its breath, and the woman and the dog kept each other company inside a wall of corn that the whole county believed was the grave of her good sense. On the 5th day, in a lull, she went out to rebank a section of the wall on the north side that had slumped under the weight of drifted snow. It was heavy, wet, bitter work, and her mittens froze stiff, and she was down on her knees in the trampled snow, pulling the fallen shocks back into their courses, when her hand came down on something that was not ground. The snow there had melted back to bare earth in the lee of the wall, and the earth was not the packed hard dirt she knew. It had been turned, it had been dug, and filled, and it was soft under a skin of frost, and running through it, when she brushed the snow away with her frozen mitten, was the straight clean edge of a plank set flush into the ground. She knelt over it a long moment, with the wind coming back up around the corner of the house. She had banked shocks over this very spot in October, and never once felt a thing beneath her feet, because the ground had been frozen hard on top and she had not been looking. She got her fingers into the seam and worked, and Props came and put his nose down and whined, and she worked the frozen plank up out of its bed, and beneath it there was a lidded trench. Stay with me, because this is where the story stops being about a wall of corn and becomes about the man who built it. The trench ran along the base of the north wall. Plank lidded its whole length, dug down below the frost line and lined with dry sod and straw. It was the length of a tall man lying down and better than knee-deep, and it was packed. There were crocks of lard sealed with wax and cloth. There were sacks of cornmeal and flour, doubled against the damp, and a keg of salt pork, and dried apples strung and coiled, and beans and peas dried hard as gravel in a covered barrel, and a stone jar of sorghum, and 2 hams wrapped in ash cloth. There was a good axe head greased against rust, and a coil of rope, and a box of lucifer matches in a tin, and a small iron pot. There was enough food, banked away below the freezing line beneath the very wall the county had laughed at, to carry 1 careful woman and a dog clean through the hardest winter the plains could throw, and half of another. Marta sat back on her heels in the snow and could not, for a moment, get her breath. She had been rationing. She had been dividing her coffee tin of provisions by the day and lying awake doing the arithmetic of starving slowly. And all the while, an arm's length below her, her husband had left her a winter and a half of food, dug in the last autumn he had strength for. Under the wall he had taught her hands to build. He had said nothing. He had let her think she was scraping. Or, she understood, kneeling there he had run out of time to tell her the last of it, for the fever takes a man's words before it takes the man. Which of the two it was she could not say, and it did not matter. What mattered was that he had spent his dying to lay a table for her, and hidden it under the one thing he knew she would build, even when she did not understand why. And at the far end of the trench, wedged upright against the sod at the head of it, dry and safe below the frost, was a small tin box with her name scratched into the lid. Marta, just that, in his blunt, careful hand, the same clumsy letters he had scratched on the flour sack and inside the cabin's one book. She did not open it. She sat and looked at it a long while, and then she set the plank lid back over the trench, and she banked the fallen shocks up over it again, careful, to his old pattern, because whatever was in the box she was not going to read it kneeling in a lull between gusts with her mittens frozen stiff. Some things you carry inside before you open them. She took only enough from the trench to eat easy that night, a ham and a sack of meal and a string of apples, and she went in, and she fed the dog well for the first time in a week, and she sat by the stove with the tin box unopened on the table where she could see it, and she let the storm scream, and she was not afraid of it anymore. If you have made it this far into Marta's story, you already understand something about the people who love us. Subscribe and stay, because the wall she built was about to be tested by more than the weather. On the 7th day, the wind eased enough to see, and Marta went up on the drift that had built against the south side of the house, and she looked out across the flat, and what she saw stopped her cold in a way the storm never had. There was no smoke. From her rise she could see clear to the Hodel place and past it toward the Pruitts, and where there should have been 3, 4, 5 chimneys breathing against the white, there was nothing. The bare houses out on the flat, the good frame houses that had cost real money and that folks had been proud of, stood dark and buried to the eaves with the wind stripping their walls to the frost line, and not one of them showed smoke. She understood what that meant. She had banked her fool wall of corn, and her neighbors had banked nothing, because they had known better, and now they were burning their furniture and their fence rails and running out, and some of them were 4 and 6 and 8 to a house with the cold coming through the walls faster than any stove could answer it. And she understood one thing more. Standing on that drift, somewhere out in this, most likely holed up in town where the storm had caught him, was Otto, who had come out in his good coat to price her off the only warm ground in the county. She did what Heinrich would have done, which was the thing that did not make arithmetic sense. She got a rope from the trench, and she strung it from her door out to the section line, tying it off to the fence posts she could reach, hand over hand into the white, so that a body could follow it in and not be lost 30 feet from the house. And then she banked the storm as best she could, and she waited, and she kept the stove going and the smoke going up. Because a chimney breathing steady in a whiteout is a lighthouse, and she meant hers to be seen. They came on the 8th day, the Pruitts first, Alma and her husband Wendell, and their 8 half-frozen, having burned the last of their fence and their kitchen chairs, following the smoke that was the only smoke, stumbling the last stretch along Marta's rope with the children roped between them. Alma came through the door white to the lips and could not speak, and Marta got them in and got them down by the stove and put the little iron pot on and fed them from her husband's trench, cornmeal and salt pork and sorghum, and the children ate until they cried, and then slept in a heap on the floor, with Props laid out warm among them like he had been waiting all his life for exactly this many children. The Hodel boys came next, the same ones who had ridden past Hollering Dog's Nest in October, and they came with their heads down and could not look at her, and she fed them too and said not one word about October. There was no room to say it in. There was barely room to stand. The little sod house that the county had written off held 19 souls and a dog that night, warm inside its wall of corn, while the good houses stood empty and freezing on the flat. Otto came last, near dark, half carried between the 2 oldest Hodel boys who had gone back out on the rope to bring him in when Wendell said he'd seen a man down near the section corner. He had been caught out trying to reach the claim, some said later, though whether to shelter or to see it torn down before the widow could prove it up, no one ever quite said to Marta's face. He was frostbitten in 2 fingers, and his good coat was a ruin of ice. And when they got him down near the stove and the feeling came back into him, he wept, a grown man in front of a room of his neighbors, and could not stop. Marta knelt and worked the ice out of his boots and put her own dry socks on his feet and gave him broth from her husband's trench with her own hands. And still she said nothing about the good coat or the man in town or the dog's nest. Heinrich's brother. She fed Heinrich's brother because he was cold, and that was the whole of the arithmetic she cared to do. Once, in the worst of the night, he tried to say something to her, some piece of the thing he had come out to do, and she put a cup of broth in his hands and hushed him. "Drink," she said. "There's time for talk when the wind quits." He drank, and he did not try again, and the wind did not quit for 2 more days. They were long days. The children learned the dog's name and wore him out, and he loved it. Alma helped her portion the trench so it would stretch, the 2 women working shoulder to shoulder over the crocks and sacks by lamplight, while the men fed the stove and the storm leaned on the roof. Nobody spoke of October. There was a kind of shame in the room that did not need speaking, and a kind of grace that did not either. And the wall of corn kept the cold off all of them the same, the mockers and the mocked, without knowing the difference or caring. For 2 more days the storm blew itself out over a house full of the people who had laughed. They slept in shifts and ate careful from the trench and kept the stove fed with coal and, when the coal ran low, with cornstalks pulled from the inside of the wall, so that the very thing that had been the joke of the county was now the thing warming the county's children. On the last night when the wind finally began to gentle, and the children were asleep, and the grown folks sat quiet in the stove light with the weight of the near thing settling on them, Alma Pruitt asked her, lo, how she had known to build the wall. Marta looked at the fire a while. My husband taught me, she said. He walked me out among the shocks the last good autumn and showed me how, and I did not understand it, and I built it anyway. That was all she said. She did not say that she had nearly not built it, or that she had wept out there with her arms full of corn, or that she had sat one bad hour and believed the Reverend was right and she had gone soft. She said only that he taught her, and she let it be his. The morning the storm broke, the sun came up on a white world so bright it hurt, and one by one the neighbors bundled their children and thanked her, awkward and real, and started back across the drifts to dig out what the winter had left them. Otto was the last to go. He stood in the door a long time, his frostbit hand wrapped in a rag, and he looked at the ring of shocks all around the little house, gold brown and half burned down now on the inside where they had fed the stove, and he looked at his brother's house that he had called worthless. I was wrong about you, he said, and I was wrong about the house. He said it plain, without the good coat softness, and Marta believed him. Then he told her the thing he had carried out in October and swallowed. That buyer I brought never had the papers right, he said. This ground was never mine to sell, nor the bank's to take. It's yours, free and clear in Heinrich's own filing. I knew it when I came, Marta, and I came anyway, and I'm ashamed of it. If you ever want it proved up all the way, I'll swear to it myself before the land office. Then he went, small and dark, across the great white flat, and Marta stood in her doorway with the dog against her leg and watched him go until he was nothing. And then she went inside and shut the door on the cold, and she took down the tin box with her name on it, and she drew a chair up to the stove, and she opened it. We are almost to the end now, and the end is the reason for all of it. Stay with me. Inside the tin box, on top, was money. Not a fortune. It was $38 in worn bills and coin, folded careful, more than she had seen in a year, tucked in against the day she would need it, and there would be no crop to make it. Under the money was the deed and the filing papers, kept dry below the frost all winter, her name on them where Otto had said, the little house and its ground hers past any argument. And under the papers, folded twice, was a single sheet in his blunt hand, and it was to her. Marta, it read, If you are reading this, then the winter came and I did not, and I am sorry for it, sorrier than I have got the words for. You will have built the wall by now, or you will not have, and I have laid this where you will only find it if you built it, because I know you, and I know you will do the thing I asked even when you cannot see the sense in it, and that is why I could go easy, for I never once doubted you would build the wall. The corn keeps the wind off the house and the cold out of the walls. My father taught it to me and his father to him, and I taught it to your hands in the good weather, so that the winter I am gone the cold still cannot reach you. There is food enough here for you, and better. Keep the wall banked, Marta. Bank it again next fall, and every fall, and you will winter fine on this ground long after me. I could not leave you much. I have left you the whole winter. Keep the wall banked, and know that I did not go anywhere the cold can follow. She read it through twice, and then she folded it back along his creases and held it, and she did not weep as she had feared she would. It had been for her. All of it, from that first evening he walked her out among the standing shocks with the sun low on them, had been for her, dug in and banked over and hidden under the one chore he knew she would do out of love and stubbornness even after the county named her mad for it. He had not left her a nest. He had not left her a joke. He had left her a whole winter and a wall the wind could not get through. And he had trusted her hands to build the thing that would save her before she ever understood it needed saving. The most that anyone had ever loved her, she understood, was buried in a trench under a wall of dead corn, and it had been there in the ground the entire time the county was laughing. She did not stay soft in the head after that, whatever the county had said, though the county said it less and less. Word got around, as word does, of the one warm house in the 9-day blizzard, of the dog's nest that took in 19 souls, of the widow who fed the men who mocked her out of a trench her husband dug. The Hodel boys came out in the spring and helped her put in her corn without being asked, and stood the shocks with her that next fall, awkward and careful, learning the height and the thickness of the ring from her own hands as Heinrich had once taught them to hers. Alma Pruitt banked her own house that autumn, and so did the Pruitts' neighbors, and within a few winters half the flat was ringed in gold-brown corn against the wind, so that a person coming over the rise in December would see a whole scatter of little houses each sitting warm inside its own held breath, and would never guess that the fashion had started as the joke of a grieving woman folks had given up on. Marta wintered on that ground 11 more years, and she banked the wall every fall of them, and she never again let anyone tell her a thing was worthless because they had not troubled to understand it. In the lid of the tin box, under her own name in his hand, she began to keep a small list, scratched in careful with the point of a knife, just as he had scratched hers. It was the names of the ones who had come to her door out of the storm. Alma and Wendell Pruitt. The 8 children, each one. The Hodel boys. Otto, she did not write them there as a ledger of who owed her, because she did not think anyone owed her a thing. She wrote them there because a house is not the walls, and it is not the wall of corn either. A house is the names of the people it has kept warm, and she meant to keep the count, and to add to it, for as long as the ground was hers. And it was hers. It had been hers all along, sitting out there worthless on the wind-scoured prairie, the one thing no one wanted, breathing smoke into a killing storm while the good houses stood dark. The thing they laughed at was the thing that lived. The man they never troubled to know had reached out of the ground to keep his wife from the cold, and she had kept his wall banked, and the cold never once reached her. So here's the thing I would leave you with tonight. The thing Marta learned kneeling in the snow with her bare hand on a plank she never knew was there. Sometimes the people who love us build us walls we do not understand while they still have the strength, and they trust us to keep them banked long after they are gone. And sometimes the thing the whole world has decided is worthless is the very thing that will carry you through the winter, if only you had the stubbornness to build it when they laughed. Would you have banked the wall, do you think, with the whole county calling you mad and the reasons buried where you could not see them? Or would you have taken the man in the good coat's hand and gone back east where it was safe? Tell me in the comments, and I will read every one. Take care of the walls the people you love have built for you. Keep them banked. And sleep warm tonight, wherever in the world you are.